I think my life just, and you know this, you know, and I don't know how to say this without crying, but my life has never been easy. So I think I just feel like nobody's ever understood me. Nobody's ever understood like why I am the way that I am. For the longest time, I was just working with a bunch of like upper class white men. And I remember having to be really like work twice as hard as them and always questioning like why though. But saying that, there's a lot of microaggressions and stuff even with South Asians to each other, you know, like, you know, fat shaming, color shaming, you know, education shaming, socioeconomic like shaming. There's so much. Hello and welcome back to another episode of What's Brown Got to Do With It. Now, this one's extra special because my guest today is my sister. Woohoo! My sister Neda. Neda with an E, not Neda with an I. So it's not Neda, it's Neda. And I also need to, because she told me before we started recording, I need to let you know that What's Brown Got to Do With It, actually the name came from my sister. So welcome, Ned. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, reluctantly, she was a little bit nervous about having this. But when I was thinking about some like conversations, so the other day, I was talking to somebody and we were talking about my birthday. My birthday's coming up, and I was talking about not feeling like I've accomplished anything, not feeling like I really want to celebrate. There were so many like thoughts going in my mind, and then I just got really kind of emotional and upset. And usually when I'm in that state of mind, the first person I ever call is my sister. And so she's always my sounding board, and she's always the one to, you know, kind of break it down for me and tell me like it's not how I'm always seeing things. So at that moment in time, I think that's when I decided that, oh, you know what, I should actually do a podcast with you, because there will be no more of a real conversation than with us, although there probably is a lot we can't say.
I was just about to say that. We'll probably end up offending people.
Yeah, so we'll be a little bit careful for the first one. But, you know, when we were growing up, so for those of you who don't know, our background is a little bit different. Now, our dad is from India. I was going to say my dad, but he's your dad too. So our dad is from India. And our mum, although originally, you know, they're from India, but they migrated to Pakistan. And so it's been a little bit like different for us, because I think, you know, growing up, we've been a little bit confused ourselves, right? Like, would you say that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we only ever visited India, for example, but we supported the Pakistani cricket team.
Yeah, true. Growing up, we didn't actually go to Pakistan very often at all. But yeah, I feel like we actually just supported the better looking team.
Yeah, that's true. And to annoy Dad.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just, yeah, I think there was a level of annoyance. But even like going to school, we were never really accepted by the Pakistani community
No, never. That's true.
in our school, because they never actually saw us as Pakistani. We were too, what's the word? We were too progressive for them.
Yeah, we weren't traditional. We didn't have to, I don't know, tie our hair up at home and then have it down when we were at school. Do you remember that? Did you?
Yeah, I mean, we wore skirts in PE. I think that was a really big deal.
Oh yeah,
Like,
cycling
oh my God, how are
shorts.
you wearing a skirt?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it was like, oh wow, and how are you not wearing like, you know, jogging bottoms and stuff? Because they were,
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, a lot of the community, the Pakistani community or the Muslim community, you know, growing up, they were very conservative, like very, very conservative.
We had friends
And I
that were
think,
boys, and that was allowed.
yeah, for you it was.
That's a good point, actually. I was allowed to have friends that were boys.
Maybe I had too many guy friends. That was the problem. But the other issue also is that, you know, like for us, part of our upbringing was dad was very like, he wanted us to be independent and then, you know, stand on our own 2 feet. So he always taught us, like be to be a little bit different. And a lot of our, people that we grew up with, like from the Pakistani community, they didn't have that
No,
advantage.
no,
Like
no.
we saw a lot of sneaking around, right?
Which we didn't have to do.
Yeah.
Well,
Again, you didn't. But I do feel, oh, in all honesty, maybe being the second child as well, I feel like I really did pave the way
yeah,
for you. I feel like they went through so much crap with me that when it came
it's
to
true
you, they were
actually.
just
Like, thanks for that.
like, I kind of like saved you from. And by the time it came to you, it's like, just do what you want. We just can't be
Wear a
bothered.
skirt. Who cares?
Show your ankles. Nobody cares.
Oh.
But then I think that also translated to us not having many kind of, and I'm going to generalize it, but Muslim friends growing up.
No, we were told to always, it wasn't about you can only be friends with Muslims or you can only be friends with, a particular religion. It was
Yeah.
always respect all religions, respect everyone, be friends with everyone. I wasn't,
But I do think, like, from all our,
yeah,
yeah, from our friends growing up, we probably had the most
yeah,
diverse set of
that's
friends.
true. That's, yeah.
I mean,
As
your BFF was Mary Middleton for the longest time.
at primary school. Yeah, don't forget Haley and Sarah.
Oh yeah, you did.
I know,
You had
but then I
Haley and
met Homa
Sarah.
at secondary school.
Yeah, I mean, that was different. But for the longest time, it was Mary, Haley, Sarah. But a lot of people wouldn't like have that. But going back to like looking a certain way, so when I often think about this, like why, are people the way that they are? And I look at Dad and I think about, just like he obviously moved to England much later than Mum did. Mum was there before Dad
Hmm.
was. And so it was very like a different kind of, because Dad probably moved there in the 70s. Um,
Yes.
and for him, he came like from with this notion that you have to be different, you have to look different, you can't be associated with being like this typical South Asian.
Do you remember
And I think
everyone
that
used to think
translates.
he was a doctor because of how smartly he was
Yeah,
always dressed?
yeah. Dad always, even to this day, when he goes out, he wears a blazer. Like, and we've never seen. I mean, Dad tells us like he's never ever worn jeans
Yeah, yeah,
in his
never.
life, but Dad's always worn a blazer. Even now, when he goes out, he will always have like trousers and a
Oh
blazer
God,
on. Like that's
that
his
Harris tweed
signature look.
jacket.
Yeah, like his dad loves his tweed. But I do feel like a lot of that was to kind of move away from the narrative, right? That, all Asians are like, we're going to have our hair tied back or oil in our hair and, we're going to be like nodding our head side to side. And there was just this stereotype that people had. And Dad really did his best to try and fight
Yeah,
against
and to
that.
keep away from that. That's true.
And so what that translated to, and even to this day, like I am very particular that when I leave the house, I have to look a certain way.
Presentable.
And I remember, yeah, when Aman was a baby, I don't know if you remember this, but I used to be a bit cray-cray about how he had to look. Like he was always dressed very smart. He was always, and if I ever came home and
Yeah,
this
no.
boy had two mismatched
I
socks,
remember everyone thought you were being extra, but you weren't. It was it was in
it
you.
was just the way we were.
You a bit more
It
than
was
me
just in
though.
me.
But again, maybe
Like I said,
because you're the eldest. So,
yeah,
by the time they
I got it
exactly.
harder. Yeah. I mean, I remember mum used to tell me, or mum used to tell us that, like even before I was born or when I was born, like Dad only used to go and buy like clothes from
Yeah,
Harrods and Selfridges. Like he was very, very proud,
yeah.
and that time it was like, wow, these weren't like cheap things and stuff, but Dad always wanted us to look our best. And maybe by the time you came, they were just like
I
fed
can
up.
have her hand me
But that
downs.
kind of also, yeah, but then maybe that also gave you this level of, I don't know, that level of not feeling as pressurized.
Definitely. And I also, to be honest, I never felt as if, you know, I'm Asian or Indian, Pakistani, anything like that. For me, this was all just normal because I saw you go through it. So it wasn't,
Yeah.
I didn't know any different. And even though, we live in, like, being from East London, it was very, to me, that was all just, this is how it's supposed to be. It was actually when I got to secondary school and I had more Asian friends that I realized actually we're a bit different. we,
Yeah.
like you said,
Yeah.
we didn't fall into the, are we Indian or are we Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Bangladesh. It was nothing like that. It was where, I don't know, do you still feel like that even now, that you're not actually sure where you sit?
I think I'm actually more confident where I am now. I don't think I think of myself as Indian or Pakistani, or, I don't define myself like that. Although I feel that as I've, gotten older and has definitely moved to this part of the
Yeah.
world, it's more about people want to identify you as that. Like they need to box you
Oh, the
into
whole
one of those
where are
things.
you from? Like, well, no, really, where are you from?
Oh
Yes.
yeah, where are you really from? Yeah, and I don't know where I'm from. Like, I'm from everywhere.
Well, my kids are in denial.
I remember once.
We're from England.
Actually, I remember once a man, when he was much much younger, somebody asked him, like, where are you from? And he said, I'm a quarter Indian, a quarter
I
Pakistani,
remember this.
and half English. And I was like, I don't know, like, where your white dad came from. I can tell you, it wasn't me. And so that's also interesting. There's probably another topic about what our kids actually think. But I remember, like, going back to the way we look, focusing on how we present ourselves. So do you remember, like, one time I was working in a place with, and like two of my best friends now,
Oh,
with
yes.
them, and one of my best friends, like, she's also very presentable. Like, everyone, we all take care of the way we look and wear makeup and stuff. And I remember we used to be called the Princess
Yeah.
Posse. And it was, I mean, now there's a label to it, right? It's not even a micro, but a macroaggression. But at that time, we never actually, we would laugh it off, but it became a thing. And it's so derogatory because the actual meaning behind it, or the way the people were saying it, was like, oh, well, you're just always dressed up from head to toe.
Exactly.
And what do
You
you
were
know?
just seen
Like,
as pretty. That was it. That was all there was to you. Yeah.
yeah,
I know.
exactly. I mean, for lack of a better word, I don't want to use the word bimbo
Yeah.
because I feel like that's so derogatory in
That's
itself,
true.
but that's how, it was kind of made to feel. And so the repercussion of that was that you had to work twice as hard as anybody else to prove that actually I'm not, like, dumb, I'm not stupid. I do have a brain. You can be presentable, you can be good looking, and you can actually have a brain. But also, I realized much later in life that we didn't have the privilege of just turning up to work in our pajamas and not brushing our hair, which later in life I actually saw a lot of, like a lot from my non-colored colleagues, that they would just turn up in whatever they wanted to turn up in and still be okay. But if I ever just turned up looking like a state, then I just wouldn't be taken
But
seriously.
I was the
Now,
same.
you're a lawyer.
Exactly. I was the same at work. Imagine if I had just turned up, you know, not, like you said, not, no makeup, not brushing my hair. I would have just been, or maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I would have just been seen as, oh, a typical Asian, a typical, um, uh, like they wouldn't have, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. They would have taken me.
So then, like, I wonder what defines and who defines typical. Like, who put out that standard for what a typical Asian looks like? Was it our parents? Like, for us, was it from dad, or was it something that, So going to, like, who defines typical Asian? What a typical Asian looks like? Was it for us?
But
Was
also, like, being older, what? What's wrong with being a typical Asian? Like, I'm talking about, I was obviously a lot younger. Like,
Yeah, but then has typical Asian evolved as well, though?
Yes, must have.
There's no such
As
thing as a
typical,
typical Asian anymore.
exactly.
Yeah, because is that because we just learned to conform and assimilate into a way that was expected of us?
Possibly.
You know, back then, there were lots of like girls growing up and stuff, when we were out, they would be wearing like trousers to school, shalwar kameez out. They weren't allowed to wear like Western clothes, and things like that. But now it's just not a big deal.
What if they're in like wearing shavakamis and being out with oil in their hair?
Not as in if they're wearing Western clothes. Like wearing Western
Oh,
clothes is
oh.
just it's just normal. If
So I think
anything, I
you're,
think
yeah,
it's
it has
evolved that
evolved definitely, but it wasn't like
you can
that
still
growing
be
up.
modest.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't like that at all. And then we had this image of like what it's like in back home, like India and Pakistan, like, that they're like, I don't know, what's the word, like villages or something and repressed and whatnot. But the reality is that they probably were a lot more
So
progressive
much more modern than
than we
us.
ever were.
It's true.
Yeah. But do you think that's also because they evolved with time, whereas our parents were kind of stuck in this generation whereby they obviously moved or migrated to England or America, wherever it was, and then they took this notion with them or their own upbringing, and for them that's all they knew. And so
And maybe
because they weren't.
maybe some parents also went out of their way to make a point that although we're in this country now, we're not going to forget our values and
Mm,
our upbringing, and that's why they were extra strict with their children. Perhaps
mm.
I don't know. I mean,
That's all they knew
that's
as well,
exactly.
right? Like
But
they didn't know.
look now.
But that was really hard for us. Like you have to. I mean, for me, definitely,
We
it
had
was,
friends
like you have to.
whose parents probably didn't want them to be friends with us because we weren't. I'm sure more you.
Oh yeah, I was the rebel. Yeah,
But
but this is the other thing, right? Like it was okay. Obviously, have known me all my
oh,
life.
really?
Um, I have I have this rebellious streak to me, and I don't think it's rebellious. I think like I've always fought for justice. I've always not been vocal. I've always been vocal about inequity. I don't like when people are treated differently and stuff. And so whether that's in our own community, whether that's at home, or whether that's at work. And then there was another thing that I feel like I always got labeled with,
Was
and that was
being a
being
troublemaker.
called a
Yeah.
troublemaker.
Yes, I
Yeah,
remember this. Yeah.
right. And so when I think back to it, like where did that come from? Like if a black woman or if a black woman, comes into work, for example, and, is vocal, she's labeled as aggressive. But South Asians, and this was certainly my experience, was you're a troublemaker. But why am I a troublemaker? Is it because you're so used to people just not speaking up, or this unconscious bias that they have towards South Asians is like, you're not going to rock the boat. You're just going to be yes people, that we can always rely on you. And you'll never question authority. You'll never question anything. But then, along comes me and I'll be like, but why are we doing that? That doesn't make sense.
And they didn't
And
like that,
all of a
did they?
sudden, you're trouble. Yeah, nobody like that. people still people still don't like that. But there's just more of a platform to speak that way now. Like for us, there was no such thing as diversity, inclusion, and equity. Like, what was DEI? What was that for you? What was diversity? What did it look like for you
Well,
in a
and I was going to
workspace,
say,
even?
at work, I didn't feel it as much as a junior lawyer because there was lots of Asians. But looking up to the seniors, there was no
Mm,
representation. There was like
mm,
maybe one or two Asian, senior lawyers, partners. Um, because most, I don't know, like we would come in as juniors, but whether you'd be kept on, whether you would get promoted, it always seemed like
There wasn't
that
that
wasn't
space
happening
for it.
exactly. And I would say, even though I haven't worked now for a number of years, it's still like that.
Yeah, I was about to ask. It hasn't changed so much.
No, not in the legal field,
But
unfortunately.
why do you think that is? But maybe it's not just in the legal world, to be honest. I think in many, many, many situations, you do see like, you'll see middle
Yeah.
managers, like as South Asians, but when you see senior leadership, there's very, very few representation or few people that look like us.
I don't know why. I mean, going back to the legal field, I mean, I can only comment on that. But there was this whole drinking culture. So, you would have
Mm,
to, going out for drinks after work. And actually, a lot of,
mm,
friendships were made, politics. A lot of Asians, might not be comfortable with going to the pub, going out. I mean, I used to go, but I never drank alcohol, but it never stopped me from
mm, mm,
attending. But I know there's a lot
mm.
of Asians that might not have been comfortable even just to go. And
And even like when you say Asians, it's probably, if you actually break it down, it's probably more Muslims that wouldn't,
yeah, with
right?
the alcohol, that's true.
The Yeah, but then it's also like the whole culture of fag breaks, cigarette breaks. You know, a lot of people would have conversations
Yes.
over a cigarette break, and you'd bump into people, and then you would get in there. So already, if you're not drinking and you're not smoking, basically your life's ruined.
Exactly. And if your mum wants you home by 9 o'clock.
That's how much can you work? It's 9 o'clock.
So,
I mean, we laugh, but it's
I
true.
know.
You know, it's because I don't know even if it was a safety aspect, but again, it's just what our parents knew, or parents of that generation. That's all they knew. I mean, I remember when it was I think it was Natalie's 16th birthday, and I really wanted to go, and obviously, like nobody else was going, like it was from South Asians and stuff, but Cav and I were gonna go. And I remember that her grandma at the time sat us down and said to us, you can only go, but when you go, if you drink a drink, make sure you open a new bottle every time. And so we were like, okay. So every time we wanted a drink, we'd open like a brand new, massive, like 2 liter bottle of Coke or something, and we would only drink from that. But there was nobody else. There were no other Asians at this
See?
party apart from like the two of us, which was just really bizarre.
At least you went.
Yay! Thanks, Nat. Thanks, Natalie, for inviting us. Natalie Griffiths.
She probably thought you wouldn't turn up. Damn, they came.
They came.
Oh.
But I feel like, I don't know. And then you went to a completely different sixth form as well.
Oh my God.
But so did I.
That's true. But was
And
your
that was like a
sixth
bit of a
form
culture shock.
exactly? But was your sixth form like that as well? As in, like
Yeah, because
99%
it was,
Asians? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And that was a huge, huge culture shock coming from like
Yeah.
our schooling to A levels. But also, by the way, that was the first time I also realized that Gujarati Muslims existed.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Well,
never knew that any other type of Indians, like for the longest time, we were the only like kind of Indian Muslims
that's a good
that
point,
we knew.
actually.
And then I went to sixth form and it's like, oh wow, there's a whole community of people I had no idea about. And then I didn't feel as like isolated
Oh, for
from
being
the Indian
Indian.
side.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's true, actually. That's where I met Fazana. Fazana, hi.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like really, and actually at that time, I think Pakistanis were the minority in my sixth form.
Oh,
It's actually
I don't know.
non-colored people are the minority in my sixth form.
I couldn't say. I think we had a good mix, but obviously the Asians were the majority. But then I went to uni
But then I feel,
where I was thrown into again where hardly any Asians. It was it was actually a really good mix. Um, but I was fine. I was able to adapt. I was able to, just I didn't find it a big shock. I mean, I know someone who left Warwick University because they couldn't handle how many that there weren't any Asians. They just couldn't,
uh,
and then they went to a London university
because they
instead.
were so used to that, yeah, growing up.
Growing exactly,
That's
and
insane.
they actually left.
But that's how people migrated. When people like left and migrated to the UK or immigrated to the UK, um, they actually, that's how the clusters formed, right? So the Pakistani community moved to one side where there were more Pakistanis, the
Yes.
Indians moved to one, Bangladeshis moved to another, Sri Lankans. Like, so even now, when you think about London, as a community, you've got like a lot of, for example, Gujaratis, Indians in West London. You've got a lot of Pakistanis in East London. You've got a lot of like, at the time, the Bangladeshi community that was mostly like in Whitechapel, um, Tower Hill, like that area
Okay.
and stuff. So people, even like a lot of Greek Cypriots, you find a lot of them in North London. So there are still like pockets of communities because that's they were what they were familiar with, right? So that's where they ended up. It's only now that in our generation, like people, we move now where schools are good and we don't care
Exactly.
about
Or we can
who's living
afford to
there.
buy a
But
house because
yeah, that as well, where you exactly. But it wasn't like that. Like you were just kind of stuck in the community that your parents were kind of familiar with or knew of. Although it's a bit weird for us because none of our family lived anywhere near us. If you think about it.
do you think mum and dad did that on purpose?
On purpose. I mean, in a way, it's good because it kind of also taught us to explore and,
Also, we didn't rely
meet other people.
exactly. I have friends who
Mm.
are only socialize with their family members, only know know their family because they're all close by and there's so many of them. But like you said, we had no choice but to. But we're fortunate. We were able to make friends and have close relationships with our cousins and families.
With our
Yeah,
family. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure. But I feel like that's also kind of worked in our favor as we've got older because we're able to kind of adapt to different situations. We have a massive, like a very diverse set of friends.
yeah.
Um, you can't say that you just have more
One.
of one than the other.
I don't
I
think I
mean,
could
I've got like a
handle it.
gazillion.
I don't think I could handle it. I know you
Yeah.
definitely couldn't. Just to imagine you'd have the same conversation over and over. Nobody would have a different outlook. Nobody, it would be such a boring
I
discussion.
don't know how guys do it.
Yeah.
Like guys just have like those one or two close friends. Don't you get bored? This is a question for men. Don't you get bored of your two friends?
And having the same conversation. Like,
I mean, maybe they just don't talk. Maybe they just play FIFA. I don't
I
know.
don't know.
Maybe we just don't see each other. We actually see our friends more, but we're more likely to pick up the phone and call our
That's
friends.
true. That is true. I mean, Yusuf can go months without seeing his friends. I couldn't do that. So I've been thinking that obviously you're used to asking all the questions. It's your podcast. I think I should get to ask you a few questions now. See how it feels to be Shadia. Is that okay?
Oh my god! Well, as my guests say, like don't make this awkward.
Don't make this awkward. No, no, I won't make this awkward. Let's start off with what made you decide to, like, did you just wake up one day and think, let's start a podcast? Like, what made you do this? Why are you doing this?
Actually, it was a bit like that, wasn't it? Um, I think I don't know. I'm at that point in my life where I have been thinking so much about what I stand for, what my values, what my ethics are. And I really do think like it's not been easy for me. I think my life just, and you know this, you know, and I don't know how to say this without crying, but um, my life has never been easy. And I feel like I've always had to fight against the narrative, right? So whether that narrative was created at home from parents, from family, with that expectation, you know, you're the eldest and you need to be this and, you know, do things a certain way. I mean, I think one of the things about our own upbringing was that although we were kind of taught to stand on our own 2 feet and be independent and never rely on anybody, but there was also that element of control
Yes.
that, you know, was really difficult. And so it was conflicting
Mm.
to grow up that way. Like, but you want me to be independent, but then you don't want me to have an opinion when it comes to you. Like,
Yeah.
just be independent outside of the house. That doesn't make sense.
Mm.
So I think I just feel like nobody's ever understood me. Nobody's ever understood like why I am the way that I am. And I think I have in the last few years started to be more accepting of people when I try and think about why they are the way that they are. So nobody's born mean, right? Nobody's born with a certain viewpoint. It's things that shape you, it's experiences. Nobody's born aggressive. Nobody's born a troublemaker. But when you're having to constantly fight that narrative, and for me, I feel like from a work situation, I mean, you know, I was in the UK government for so long, and for the longest time, I was just working with a bunch of like upper class white men.
Mm.
And I remember having to be really like work twice as hard as them and always questioning like why though. I mean, I remember there was this one certain project and my manager at the time, he was sat down and he was explaining to me like why, you know, he needs somebody on this project and they need to be, the way he was making it out was like they need to be South, you know, it'd be really good if they have this South Asian background and this intel and I honestly thought that, you know, he's telling me because he wants me to, you know, do this.
Yeah.
And then he turns around and says like, oh, you know, I think like, I don't know, Bob will be great for this. And I was so confused and I was like, are you for real? Like, what the hell does Bob know about being South Asian or any of the things that we've just spoken about?
So why was he
And
telling
that
you
for
then?
me, I was his sounding board.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
I was actually probably the most sane person. Like, he knew he could get, you know, reason out of me, he could get solutions. Like, I work really hard, but it was never enough. And so going back to what you were saying, that when you're at a senior leadership level, you never, you know, it's very rare to find people that look like you or represent you. It's a case of that. And I remember having to fight for that project from him, and he was like, oh, okay, I'll give it to you. But then there was this added pressure that, you
Exactly,
know
because
what, have you just set me up for failure?
exactly. Did you do it?
Exactly. And so yeah, I did it, and obviously it was like, you know, it was a great success, but that's not the point. The point is, because I had to fight so hard to get it, that, you know, you don't feel that euphoria, you don't feel that like success, because you just feel that, oh, relief that, oh, okay, I didn't mess this up and, you know, people aren't going to see me
And
in a certain way.
and you
Or,
think that you weren't chosen for that initially because of the color, because of your color?
yeah,
Oh,
I was just never in a, you know, contender for it because I'm okay at this level,
yeah.
but, you know, I will never be considered at that level to get to that level. And it's tiring, you know. I'm now at a point in my life, like, I'm really tired. I'm tired of having to work so hard and, you know, not moving and not getting anywhere or feeling like that I'm just not doing enough. Whereas, you know this. I'm a single parent. I've been raising, you know, Aman on my own for God knows how many years now. I'm doing my masters. I'm working a full-time job. I started the South Asian Affinity Group. I'm doing this podcast, and it still doesn't feel like I'm doing enough. I'm
And
still feeling
you
like I don't.
and you keep time for your friends, which isn't easy. You're a good friend.
It's not, but maybe that's what keeps me sane. But the point is, I don't feel validated. And so back to being South Asian and doing things for validation, like I do think it goes hand in hand. And I think it's a generational kind of trauma that comes, like everybody needs to feel validated. So as a South Asian, like our parents' generation, like for dad, for example, he needed to feel validated by not appearing to be a typical Indian,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's what his thing was. I need to set myself apart from everybody else, so I'm taken seriously. And so now I wonder, like, you know, when you talk about diversity, even in our government and stuff, you know, and you have people that do make it to the top, but then how much do they do to
Help South Asians
remember their own struggle?
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was
Or
having
maybe
this
they go,
conversation with
oh, sorry to interrupt, but maybe they just go so out of their way to prove that they're not just representing the South Asians and looking out for them, that they go to the next extreme. Do you find that?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's it. And so I was having this conversation with another guest on another podcast, and we were talking about like how even, you know, my experience with South Asians a lot of the time is that we're so quick to drag each other down, but not actually be like, oh, amazing, you know, they've done really well, or you know, let's talk about this success. Let's talk about, you know, okay, how did you get there? It can't have been easy. But I'm now finding that people are either completely blanking out when it comes to the struggle, and they just want to talk about the success,
Yes.
or they just don't want to actually associate with. I mean, I've heard this so much now that actually I don't feel like I am South Asian, or I don't, you know, brown's got nothing to do with it for me, because
The colour of my
yeah,
skin
it's
makes...
got nothing to do. It's had nothing to do with the color of my skin. That can't be true. It has to have done. Like growing up, how many South Asians did you see on TV? You didn't, right?
No. Remember, everyone used to watch EastEnders. And then when that first Asian family...
Oh, we had Sanjay.
And
Sanjay.
it was like, exactly, and then it was...
Ah!
Oh my God. I think we're showing our age, by the way.
Yeah. But you know, it's a bit insane. And how can you then say, like, how could the, like, I don't know who played Sanjay in EastEnders, but you know, for him to get there, there must have been a point when an actor would be like, well, there's nobody that looks like me. This can't be easy for me.
Exactly.
It can't be that you can't have just walked into an audition and been like, here, you know, yeah, I'm really good at this. But there must have been some apprehensions, some, you know, confidence issues, other like hidden trauma and stuff that we just
Don't
don't know
know.
about. People don't talk about that
But
enough.
going back to your podcast, though, so what are you hoping to achieve from this podcast? So you've told us why, you know, what made you want to do it in the first place, but what are you now hoping to gain, to achieve, or, you know?
That's a good question. I think it was like started off as a passion project. It still is, you know. I just want to be able to have some conversations with people, and have them talk about some of their struggles. And for people listening in, you know, like when I think of my son, like when I think of Aman, or, you know, the kids, they should be able to listen in and understand that, okay, it hasn't been easy, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Like there is a way, and I might go through these struggles, and that might be actually normal for me to go through those and to feel a certain way, but also that it's okay to speak out. So somebody once recently, I think actually this might have been the catalyst. Somebody, we were talking about something, and they said, you know, it could be worse. And it was related to a struggle. And I said, you know, but why can't it be better?
Exactly.
And I think for me, that was like the triggering moment, that we're so conditioned to think that it could be worse and we should be grateful for what we have, that we don't ordinarily aspire to do better or to be better for ourselves, for other people, that it is okay to speak up. it is okay to question. It is okay to value yourself, because if you don't value yourself, then who's going to do that for you? And again, back to this whole sense of validation. Like, I'm still struggling with it. I'm saying all of this, but I need validation, whether it's in my career, whether it's through, you know, acknowledgement of something that I'm doing, whether it's, you know, being able to prove that I can raise a child and do my master's and do a full-time job and, you know, do all these other things, like a crazy person. But I need that validation. I just don't feel. Sometimes I feel like the color of my skin doesn't help me.
Yeah, but the reality is,
And that's hard.
as I say, but the reality is, it doesn't. It is hard. You know, you feel all of this for a reason. You know, it's.
I think maybe when you see other people around you doing well, moving, getting successful and doing things, and you wonder, well, what's the difference between you and I? And then the only difference you can probably think of is the color of your skin. And that's a hard reality.
I know.
Because you think, even in this day and age, like, how is that even possible?
It's true.
With all this.
I honestly thought it would be
education.
different now. It would be different for our children. But actually, you know, yes, there's been progress, but then sometimes I still think that, are they going to go through the same struggles we did? It's still, I mean, you know,
Such a long way to go.
Such a long way, exactly. There's still so much change that needs to happen. But, you know, but Shah, doing things like this podcast, raising awareness, these are all steps. These are steps for positive change. If
they are, and I hope, you know, it resonates with somebody. I hope, like, somebody can turn around and say, okay, that helped, and I can speak up. And I've been doing it for years.
But so you can maybe you can do a podcast on some tips on what not to do, or like.
Oh yeah, how to. It's hard because my experience has always been that people don't necessarily help themselves, right? So they feel isolated. They feel that, you know, like the whole being the color of my skin is a kind of drawback, and they want to, but they don't know how to speak up. So they're happy to kind of use, i.e. me, someone who does speak up and is vocal, and use me as the human shield to, you know, tell their story. But that's difficult because you get labeled.
Exactly.
You know, that's where you get like the label of troublemaker, or I don't know, like that's a massive label to have, to walk into a job or a new place of work and then say something and they're like, oh, this one's going to be trouble, because they've already made that judgment on you. And so it doesn't matter how hard you work or how much you prove yourself.
You have faced that and you have managed to overcome it, because, you know, you wouldn't be where you are.
Yeah.
If you hadn't.
I wouldn't.
But
I'm also... But I do feel this time, it has helped with that.
Fair enough.
Because now there's labels for it, right? Now we have microaggressions, we have macroaggressions, we have diversity, equity, inclusion. Like, there is so much more education around it. There is so much more hype around it now.
Training's given as well to raise awareness, to help. Faria, I'm sure this is what she gives training.
But do you think training helps? But do you think, like, training actually
helps? I know it does. I know it does, right? And I can just, I won't say any names, but I know somebody who said to me after receiving some training, and he's Asian himself, South Asian himself, that, I didn't realize that, you know, so many instances, so many circumstances, and so many things that I have said myself is actually, you know, it can be this discrimination, there's racism, there's actually, it was only after receiving the training did that person actually take a step back and think, okay, I have to stop doing certain things myself, but also things that are being said to me, about me, is also wrong. And it was only after the training did they... So maybe not for everyone, because I feel like you were going to say that you don't think training actually makes a difference, or...
Well, no, I think that I've been in situations where people have attended training
Okay.
and then they've just been like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. I don't do that.
Oh, maybe you have to.
But
I don't
they
know.
do. They don't realize that they do that. They don't realize, they have no kind of concept or acknowledgement of their microaggressions because it's just so normal to them.
So
So,
they're not open-minded. I guess if you're going to have, receive training with a
no.
closed mind, or then it won't make a difference.
And I think that's the hardest part, like being open or being self-aware. That's what it is. Some people just are not self-aware. And again, that's a privilege. That's a privilege to have, that you don't have to be self-aware because you can just say and do whatever you want, and it's okay. It's
Exactly.
accepted. But saying that, there's a lot of microaggressions and stuff even with South Asians to each other, like, fat shaming, color shaming, education shaming, socioeconomic like
Where
shaming.
you're
There's
from.
so much of it from ourselves that I think, going back to your point about why did I want to do all of this, is I want to address and have some of those conversations and have people realize that it's okay to actually speak up and say, no, I'm not here for that.
Okay. So lastly, I know you ask all your guests this question, so I'm going to ask you now. So you always ask them, what's brown got to do with it? But for you, what's what's brown got to do with it for you?
What does being brown mean to me?
Exactly.
So I think like why I asked this question is because I'm very clear on what being brown means to me. And that is, it is a big part of who I am. It's obviously shaped the way I am, like facing racism, facing, prejudice, facing cultural expectations. Like this all come from being brown. And so because of all of that, I am now very sure of my confidence or what I stand for. And so being brown to me is experience. That's what being brown means to me. My experience makes me brown. So somebody actually asked me once, like, do you feel more British or more Asian? And my answer to that is I cannot feel one without the other. Like, I am first and foremost a South Asian. I've grown up in a South Asian household, in a South Asian environment culturally, but I've also grown up in a very Western environment. And I've been I've had to acclimatize to a Western way of living, thinking, working. And so they both go hand in hand. You can't be one without the other. I cannot be British without being Asian.
Yes.
And I cannot be the Asian that I am without being British. So I think that's what being brown means to me. It means identity, it means experience, and it means Shadia.
Do you want to quickly tell your
But
listeners
thank
what
you.
Shadia means?
Oh my God, can we just talk about very lastly our names? Because
God. Are you sure
people
it's
like growing up, this was just hard.
that?
It was
Was it
hard.
Sadia?
Like,
You got Sadia, Shadia, Shazia?
oh my God, Shazia, Sadia. So, okay, South Asian microaggression, let's just put it out there, is my name is Shadia. Now, Shadia is with a D, and Shadia is an Arabic name, and I was named by my grandfather kept my name. But in South Asians, predominantly like in India and Pakistan, it's either Shazia or Sadia. And so, I've had relatives who have called me Shazia all my life.
Oh my God.
And it gets to that point where it's so embarrassing. Like, you're 25 years old, you can't tell somebody your name's not Shazia. And so moving to the Middle East, it was like heaven because, everyone's like, oh, Shadia, but then they expect you to speak Arabic. So, and it was the same for you, right? Because your name's Neda.
Exactly.
But in India and Pakistan, it's
Nida.
Nida.
And then when I was in Dubai, it was
Yeah.
Nada. So,
Yeah, it's Nada. So, yeah, that's also been really frustrating. But it's Shadia, people, not Shazia and not Sadia. And on that note, this is a goodbye from Shadia and Neda. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having
I'm so
me.
proud of everything that you are and everything that you stand for as well. We have to actually have another conversation on that.
Sure.
But I love you, and I will speak to you later.
Take care.